Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast, a very special episode 66 coming your way today. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and today you're going to meet Victoria from Total Choir Resources. It is not just resources, it's also a podcast and a blog, and Victoria is amazing. She has a co-partner, Christine, who was not in the recording today, but you'll meet her later because this is part of a series. We're going to be talking about how do you start a collaboration? How do you find that common ground and figure out what you're going to do that will be mutually beneficial for both parties? And step one in that collaboration process is getting to know your other people. So in this episode, you get to know all about Victoria and Total Choir Resources, and then she flips and asks me some questions as well. In the end, we talk about some ideas, and man, the two nuggets at the end, what really matters in the episode, you'll want to stick around because Victoria's comment is awesome. I am so thankful for our friends over at Total Choir Resources. I'm also thankful for the sponsor of the Music Ed Matters podcast, the Kennison Choral Company, and for all that they do to keep us publishing every week. Like I said, this is the first of many, so I can't wait for you to meet my new friends from the UK. This is Victoria and Total Choir Resources. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are starting a collaboration. I'm so excited. The Total Choir Resources folks, I'm looking at Victoria. Hi, Victoria.
Hi there, Emily. It's lovely to be here.
I'm so excited that you are here and we get to document our collaboration. I love your podcast. I've been listening.
Oh, well, that's great.
Every morning. Well, you reached out to me so kindly. How did you find me?
Well, we were, I was looking around for other choir podcasts, to be honest, because it's just, I always think it's just great to get different voices in your ear and start to hear different perspectives. So I read and listen as widely as I can. And I found your podcast, listened to a few episodes, like your style, and I thought maybe we'd have something to say to each other.
Well, when you reached out and sent me a message, I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then we met, and I've been so looking forward to today. So tell my listeners, and it'll be a good recap for your listeners. You're a couple hundred episodes in, so they might have forgotten by now. Who is Victoria, and where did you guys find your other half, Christine, and what is your podcast/resource?
Okay, so Total Choir Resources, because I'm British, Total Choir Resources, if you're American, was born out of the fact that my business partner, Christine Mulgrew, and I were running choirs together, and we realised that other choir leaders don't have the luxury that we have of having someone to bounce ideas off. And actually, I'm sure this will resonate with your listeners, is that when you're leading a choir, when you're in any leadership role, you can find yourself quite lonely, even though you're surrounded by people and you're working with people all the time. Because when you want to just find out if you're on the right track, when you want to bounce an idea around, but you don't necessarily want to run with it, so you don't want to make it public yet, those kind of things you can't talk to your choir about. And you probably shouldn't talk to your choir about. So it's great to just have someone else in the mix where you can just say, what do you think about this? And they can go, oh, no, that's not a great idea, whatever it is. But we had set up our choir business together. And so we already had that. And it occurred to us that other people didn't. And that's where Total Choir Resources came from, was we thought if we could put resources out there. It started off with a little ebook. Well, actually, it started off with a blog and a podcast. But then the business side of it started with just a little PDF ebook of warm-ups, and that proved very popular and is still popular now. And as we started to put things out there and hear more stories from choir leaders all over the world, we started to realise that there was an audience for that kind of stuff, and that's nearly 10 years ago now.
It's beautiful to look on your website. It's so well organized. It's easy to find everything. I love it. So the podcast started from the beginning.
nearly the beginning. We were running, actually, I joined Christine's choir. That's how it all started.
Okay.
Christine started a contemporary community choir in our village, Milford-on-Sea, in Britain. And I was not singing in a choir at the time. I'd sung in choirs all my life, but I wasn't doing. I was running a legal practice, and I was super busy. But I saw that this choir was starting in my village, and I thought, what a great idea. I'll join, and it'd be great to do some singing again. And I made some of the best friends in my life now. That those friendships have endured, not just friendships through choir, but friendships that they've then sort of moved into other parts of my life. And it was a fantastic move. And very shortly after Christine started the choir, she became pregnant with her son, and she asked me if I would step in and lead her choir.
Wow.
While she took some time off for maternity leave, and I thought, well, okay, then yes, why not? I'll give it a go.
So, okay, I think this is a big difference in the UK versus here. You don't have degrees in like music education, choir conducting. Is that correct?
There are certainly options for music degrees that include that, or even specialise in that. But it's a very rare thing in Britain. That you might get a more general music degree. You might specialise in singing, but there aren't many people who graduate with a degree in choral conducting. It's a little bit different here than in the US. I think you have a more vibrant school and college choir hierarchy, as it were. Whereas over here, I'm afraid to say that music has been horribly neglected in our schools for many decades. I was one of the very lucky beneficiaries of free music lessons at school, and music and orchestras and bands and choirs at weekends as well, where I grew up in Leicester. But those are very rare now, and so we don't have the kind of school and college choir scene that you benefit from. So whereas on the flip side, on the positive side, we have a really incredibly vibrant community choir scene over here, and also things like workplace choirs are very popular. And we've really been enjoying a huge renaissance of choral singing in Britain, up to the pandemic, when everything just went clang and stopped.
So when you open these community choirs or these workplace choirs, are they, like, we open our choirs mostly as not-for-profits, but sometimes people open them as businesses. How do you guys open them as businesses or not-for-profits? How does that work with so many community choirs?
A variety, just like you have. We run our choirs as a small business. We know lots of other people who run their choirs as some sort of non-profit, maybe some sort of community company or something like that. Or lots of our members are hired by other organisations, whether it's church organisations or community organisations, art centres, that kind of thing. So there's a huge variety.
Wow. Okay. So you're in let's go backwards in time again. So you're in this new choir. Christine needs to go on maternity leave. What choir directing experience had you had at that point?
Well, now I look back and I think it was quite audacious of me to think that I could do it. I was a decent musician, let's put it that way. I was a decent musician. I could read music. I was a good singer. I had a lot of experience of singing in choirs, including at quite a high level. I was part of a large symphony chorus near where I live for, well, probably about 10 years. And I had left a few years before because my career had just been too busy and I couldn't do both. And I missed it a lot. I missed singing at that level as well. But mostly I missed singing anything. I was prepared to sing anything. And when a choir arrived on my doorstep, I thought that was brilliant. But no, I'd done a tiny bit of conducting when I was doing like amateur dramatics at university. I'm afraid to say I have a murky Gilbert and Sullivan past. And
I love that. That's not murky.
I love it too.
I think that's
it's
awesome.
Kind of, over here, people think it's a bit cheesy.
Oh, I don't care. You can handle the cheese with big smiles.
But yeah, that's how I met my husband, actually.
Really? Oh, that's even cooler.
30-something years ago, we met doing Gilbert and Sullivan. We were in Pirates of Penzance. I was Ruth, the the sort of alto lead, and he was a policeman. He leapfrogged over somebody standing up in a policeman's costume, including the tall hat, and I was so impressed. That was it for me.
It was all the leap.
Anyway, that's going back a lot further.
That's amazing. Well, okay, so that gives you have musical backing, and you stepped up in front of the choir. So where at that time were you getting your resources, your warm-ups, your repertoire? Where were you when you started?
Well, I think for repertoire, that was fairly easy because that was all kind of already planned out by Christine. So I was taking over something that was already set up. For warm-ups and things, I knew a fair bit from my experience. And then I suppose I just read books. There are some great books out there for that kind of thing, but there weren't any online resources. And in terms of conducting skills, I went off and got and did a course with the Association of British Choral Directors, and that was fantastic. I loved it, but it did mean travelling to London, which is fairly accessible from where we are. But for a lot of people, it wouldn't be.
Right.
So that's another thing that we really wanted to help with when we set up Total Choir Resources was that idea that you don't have to go and get a formal qualification in order to lead a choir and help people sing and give them a huge amount of enjoyment. You can we don't all need to be conducting a particular style, particular type of repertoire. There's a huge spectrum of singing available, and so a huge spectrum of choir leaders that can lead that singing.
I love how that's one of my biggest loves of choir, is that there is no one way, but it's the impact that the music has on the people in our groups. Yes, music is academic and choir is and should be seen as a major class in school and such, but it's also such a fun thing, and I love how you highlight the fun aspect of it.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, we could study literature at degree level or postgraduate level, but that doesn't mean that other people aren't going to read books. Mm-hmm. There's an opportunity for everybody to enjoy literature at whatever level they want to, and we can say the same about singing, and singing as a group.
I love that. That's a perfect transfer. It's a great analogy.
Well, it's the most natural thing in the world, isn't it, singing?
It sure is. And it's I'm getting so excited for rehearsals to resume. We only have a few more weeks, and I literally am like counting down. I have a countdown.
I know exactly what you mean, but I'm trying not to get my hopes up in an odd kind of way.
Oh, I know.
I don't want to jinx it because
Yes,
we've got a few weeks before we'll go back early September, and we've got a few weeks before that, and I keep thinking, anything could happen between now and then. So I'm just trying to approach it very calmly.
Yes, that's valid. I still am so excited. I can't wait. Whatever it looks like, even if it's mass, I'm just excited to hear music in some type of space, whether that's inside or outside. How did you and Christine transition into creating your business then? Was it when she came back from maternity leave? Was it through your experiences? What happened?
Well, it was our original business idea had been that to put this into context, I was ready to leave the legal profession. I'd been doing that for about 15 years, and I felt like I was ready for something new. And that came at just about the right time. So we were talking about how we could create a business out of this. And our original plan, it seems bonkers now, but our original plan had been that we would run several choirs in our local area, and that we would also do things like workshops and team building days, and that's the thing. I don't know whether that's much of a thing in the US, but over here,
professional development days and stuff.
Singing is one of the most common types of activities that a business would run for their team.
Wait, you're meaning like you go into a not choir place and they sing?
Yeah.
That is so cool. I want to come to one of those.
So we did a bit of that, and we enjoyed it. I think we got pretty good results. We got great feedback and everything, but we were in a situation where one of us, Christine, had a small baby and couldn't do much in the way of travelling. I'm a bit older than Christine, and I was at a time of my life where I didn't want to do the whole corporate thing and a lot of travelling anymore. I'd done all that in my previous career, and so we both realised quite quickly that what we had planned wasn't going to suit us long term, and that's when we started just bouncing ideas around about what can we do, what are our skills, who can we help, who would benefit from what we do, and that's when we realised that there were choir leaders out there who didn't have the resources that we had in each other, And so we just started very low key. We just started blogging, and fortunately I'm a huge nerd, so I already kind of knew how to build a website, how to do all that kind of thing. And then we started podcasting. The podcast originally was just me reading out the blog posts. So if anybody goes back into our archive, please don't listen to the very early ones, because it's a little bit stilted. I'm quite embarrassed about it now, but it got us started, you know, and then we were getting some feedback about it, some positive feedback. And so I said to Christine, well, I think we should make this into a proper podcast. Why don't you come on? And we'd never done anything like that. We'd only recorded ourselves singing. So we set up a microphone and we got into a room, and we picked a topic. I can't remember what it was now. And Christine just started talking, and she was such a natural that I thought, oh, okay, well, this will work, you know. And it was just us chatting to each other. She was so much more natural with it than I was. I felt like I had to be perfect at everything from the word go. And I would be quite tempted to just stop and restart if anything went wrong, or I couldn't find the right word for something. But she would just be, you know, and so that's how our style was born, which is really just us having a chat.
And I love that style. You've actually talked about, I loved the imposter syndrome episode. And you talked about the importance of perfectionism and how that plays into it. And it is so true with so many things. You had to be willing to drop perfection to jump in front of that choir. You had to be willing to drop perfection to have this conversation and reach out to a random stranger in America. And
well, we call it B-minusing things.
B-minusing? Explain that.
Well, you know, sometimes when you want to over prepare, maybe you want to spend too much time on things, or you're working to a deadline, and ultimately it doesn't have to be perfect. B- is fine. So we call it, we've turned this into a verb. So we'll just say, look, we just need to B- this and get on with it, you know. Okay,
stolen. I'm stealing that. I'm going to B- that. That's hilarious. Okay, so that's how you guys got into podcast world, and now you have all these people that can join Total Choir Resources. Tell us about that part of the business now.
Well, this happened a couple of years ago now. We were doing so many things. We had ebooks and warm-ups, and we had online courses, and we had sort of live online sessions where we were training, and it was all just building so quickly. And we realized that we couldn't operate this whole thing because there were too many moving parts. So we thought, how can we make this much more simple and everybody still get the benefit of what we're doing? So we rolled it all up into a subscription membership, and then rather than people buying individual courses or ebooks or whatever, and so now that's the structure we have, is that people pay a monthly or annual subscription, and then they get access to everything that we have. And it was the best move for us. It's the best thing we've ever done business wise, because it meant that when you sell a product, whether it's a book or an online course or whatever, excuse me, that's sort of the end of the relationship, the customer relationship, unless that customer contacts you or they've got a problem or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, but with a online membership, a subscription model, that's the beginning of the relationship, and that's fantastic for us, because that's where we really excel. We're great at supporting people and helping people find clarity, building their confidence. Sometimes all people need to hear from us is that they're on the right track.
Yes.
And we can do that when we have with this subscription model, because people come in and we get to know them. We have this marvelous opportunity, and that's been even more so during the pandemic. We have the opportunity to really get to know our members. They become part of our family, and we have fantastic online live sessions with them where we talk about issues, we work through them, and that feeds beautifully into our topic today about collaboration, because it's an ongoing collaboration between us and our members.
What I hear you saying too, as we talk about collaborating, you're looking, when you're having these early collaboration conversations, you want to take the time to get to know the other person. And thank you for sharing all your story, just a little snippet into it. I'm sure we'll unpack more. But I love that at the heart of every part of this story is the human element and its connection to singing and enjoyment. I love how it's all about supporting other humans. It's the relational element. And so just knowing that we share that means that we will have the perfect kind of collaboration once we settle on what we're going to do. So we've kind of settled on doing multiple podcasts together to support each other and to spread the word of the great things, but we need to figure out how to get there. And so that's what this initial conversation is.
Yes, and don't worry, to anybody listening to the podcast, we're not going to do the whole process on this podcast.
No, this is step one. Step one is get to know your collaborators. We do something similar in our, I have a Patreon page. And if you join as a patron, you get bonus episodes, you get access to tons of more resources. I work with a really great director of operation in my community choir, and she and I work together to create drive folders of templates for just about anything you could need for getting your choir organized. So we have our small community through Patreon, but those monthly meetups when we get together and just unpack what's going on in your world, those are some of the best conversations. Makes this podcast thing so worth it in a million different ways.
I think so often the things that we can overthink as when we're planning something for our choirs or responding to something. Sometimes it's when people have problems. Maybe they've had some negative feedback, and they need somewhere to go to talk that through. And almost all the time, it turns out that what they'd originally thought was fine, how they were originally going to respond, or their original plan, they just needed to bounce it around and hear that they were on the right track.
It's also that word of encouragement. You said that earlier. Sometimes people just need to know you're doing the right thing. You've got this. That's why I say the same thing at the end of every episode. What you're doing matters. We all know music matters, and I'll see you next time. Because it's important to know that what you're doing, whether it's just showing up, that matters.
And in some ways, the last year and a half when that's been taken away has shown that up even more starkly, because,
very, very much so.
Because people still have a singing-shaped hole in their lives.
Oh, I know.
And we all want to get back to it.
Yes, we do. Hey, one more thing before we switch and you ask me questions. How did you guys settle on the title of choir leaders? Because I love that idea and that visual. Where did that come from?
Well, we talked about it a lot. It was actually a very conscious decision to use a generic, non-gendered term. We really didn't like choir mistress, which is something that we had heard a fair few times here. I know, choir master, choir mistress. I think that comes maybe a bit more from the sort of church choir tradition in this country. Okay. And we didn't really like director either. And conductor didn't cover enough, because it's not just about conducting, is it? It's about all sorts of other things too. So, yeah, we bounced that around a fair bit and settled on leader, because we thought that covered not only the people that are just conducting, so they're hired by other people who run a choir to come in and conduct. It covered people like us who were managing a choir and running it as a small business or any other sort of organisation. It also covered people who were in choir management but not doing the conducting, and we do have some members who are in that kind of role. So we thought it was sufficiently generic, but also clearly specifically about choirs.
So you cover stuff for the musical aspect, the conducting aspect, the managing aspect, all of the things that go into it.
Yeah, and often it's the management side that is the most challenging, I think, for people. Yes. The musical side often comes very naturally. And people might need some help, perhaps, but particularly as a lot of our members and a lot of our wider audience for the podcast are people who've become choir leaders almost accidentally. Yes. They were music teachers or accompanists or singers, and someone said, "This choir needs a leader. Can you step up?" And they were musicians, but they'd never raised their arms in front of a choir before. So those people we feel we can particularly help, because the music comes very naturally to them, but it's all the other stuff, the nuts and bolts stuff and the logistics that doesn't, and we're able to help with that.
That's awesome. Well, I feel like I know a little bit more about your history. Thank you for sharing. I'm so honored to be talking to some of your choir leaders today.
Who now know more about me than they wanted to, probably.
No, they need to have reminders. I think this is great.
Okay, so shall we switch now then?
Sure.
And we're going to find out about your origin story as a choir conductor. And I think it's a little more formal than mine, isn't it? Because you did study choral conducting.
I have my doctorate in conducting, not just choral conducting. So
well, you didn't get a doctorate before you got it. So what was your first degree?
My undergraduate is in music education, and my master's is in music education. And then I got a doctorate in performance, a doctorate of musical arts in conducting, with 2 doctoral minors, a minor in music history and a minor in music theory.
So you were clearly targeted on music right from the start. Now I know that the the university system over there is different to here. We specialise right from the word go. So we go and do a subject, but over there you do other subjects and then you drop them. Is that right?
It depends. So typically music majors, you have such a prescribed amount of classes to take that if you don't make that decision as a freshman or sophomore in college, you're probably going to be behind. And additionally, most music schools require an audition process. So you're usually eyeballing those programs when you're in high school.
Right. And so what was it in your high school experience that made you think, right, I want to do that professionally and I'm going to make the decisions at 16, 17 years old that are going to lead me down that path?
I decided when I was little,
tiny. Isn't that adorable?
my dad and his sister and brother sang in a gospel trio. They actually won some national gospel event in the 70s or 80s, and we would watch the old recordings of it or listen to their old records. So my house was full of singing, and I've played piano forever. So I always knew I wanted to be in music. And then in high school, I had a director who was really great. He loved the good music, but he was not a good educator. And he kind of turned me off to the idea of being a choir director. I always thought I'd be either a middle school or elementary school music person. But in high school, my director actually kind of turned me off to it. So I went into college to get a music degree because I'm like, well, if I don't like it, I'll just get my real estate license and sell real estate. I also love to view homes. My dad built homes too. So anyway, a lot of it's my dad. My mom is also super talented at the piano. She can, to this day, sight read anything. And she's
my sister's like that. It's infuriating, isn't it?
Right? My dad can play anything. And here I am I have to practice. Anyway, so in high school, I wasn't quite sure. Went to college. And then in my junior year, I was still deciding what do I want to teach. And I got put in a 2nd grade classroom and a kindergarten classroom for practicum. And my world changed. I found those little people just were the perfect match. So I started working at a Montessori school. I became a Montessori school music teacher before I graduated college because I just could not wait to get started teaching. And then went and got my master's because I knew I needed more. I had focused so much on elementary music in my undergrad that I needed more of the conducting and the secondary. So I went to my master's in music ed to focus on how do you teach the older students. And then I thought that was it. I worked for a community choir for about 10 years while also working in the school system as a music teacher. And then some things changed and I started my own choir, which was so much fun. I did it very differently. There's not many choirs on the state side that does it as an LLC or a for-profit business. So we have a for-profit choir, so the product is choir. And then we have a not-for-profit outreach branch that takes care of all of the other stuff. And it's been a blast putting together that business. But while I was doing it, I had some time to teach at the university level. And do you know, university students are the bomb. They are basically grown-up middle schoolers.
Well, the marvelous thing about that teaching at that level is that they're people who chose the subject. They're not forced into it. There's nobody there that doesn't want to be there.
Hopefully. Sometimes I do teach non-music ed classes, I teach rock and roll and Western music history and world music history and stuff like that. They don't always want to be there, but by the end, they're totally hooked. So when I taught some adjunct classes and fell in love with that age group, and that's when I went and got my doctorate so that I could, for sure, teach that age level.
And what was your thesis in?
My dissertation was
dissertation.
No, same difference. It was I did arrangements of music by Thomas Wilkes, so I'm a huge fan of your country and their music.
Oh, thanks. I'll take credit for it.
Yeah, take all the credit. I really fell in love with some of that Renaissance music, but it was hard for my younger singers to master. So I took some of the 3-part pieces by Thomas Wilkes and rearranged them so you could do them in 1 part, 2 parts, or 3 parts. So I took the melody lines and kind of rewrote them so no matter what part was singing, they had the melody, and then I would break it down into ostinatos and other things so you could build 2-3 part if you were developing that type of technique in your younger singers.
I really like that kind of arrangement structure. I think flexible arrangements are so helpful for all sorts of choirs. I mean, it's probably the same way you are, but over here there's always a shortage of tenors. So a lot of like Renaissance and Baroque music is really hard to do because it's very taxing on the tenor line, often very high on the tenor line, and you haven't got many of them. So they feel put on the spot. So it's great to have some sort of modernised arrangements of that kind of music, which I love. I would do Baroque all day, every day if I had my choice.
Really? Oh, I love it. Well, it was a fun project. I learned a lot about how to analyze those old madrigals, and so often the text is not really all that appropriate, but
I was just about to say. I mean, you've got all your fa la 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 las and stuff, but in between the fa la las, there's a lot of other stuff going on.
So it was hard to pick some, but it was a fun experiment. It sent me digging into so many manuscripts and exploring arranging and exploring how to teach it. I taught all of them to my middle school choir, my community choir, and it was fun to see which ones they liked and didn't like, and which ones were fun to sing and which ones weren't. So it ended up being a fun project, and it was.
So when we are able to get back to live choir, what will you be doing? What does your week look like?
So
Corally?
All of my choirs rehearse on Mondays. We have all of our rehearsals on Mondays. We have a kids ensemble, then we have a treble ensemble, mostly people who identify as female, and then we have a tenor bass ensemble, mostly people that identify as male. Sometimes they combine and sing pieces together. And then we have our adults, which is like a small little chamber choir of adults, and some of them have been singing since they were in diapers, and some of them just joined a choir during the pandemic.
Wow.
It's so much fun. And my dad's in that choir. He tunes in on Zoom because he lives in a different state, and he's my tenor.
That's lovely. My mum started coming along to our Zoom choir. She lives hundreds of miles away from us, but
yes.
She came along to our Zoom choir. It was lovely, and I think that kept her going a bit because she was living alone, and so all her. Yes. Normally, she's the busiest person I know, but all her interests had been shut down. And orchestras don't really work online. So so she came along to those and really enjoyed them. So it's going to be a bit of a shame not to have her in our choir once it's back to live sessions.
I told my dad and anyone else who wanted to join us that I would always set up a Zoom room for you to be in our rehearsals because it was so much fun. We did our final piece for the last concert in May. It was the Lupkin, The Lord Bless You and Keep You. The Lord bless you and keep you. And in the middle, the tenor goes, So we unmuted the Zoom and did it in the cacophony of noise. It was... So you all of a sudden there's a big pause because I'm like waiting for the Zoom to make noise, and you hear this little tiny it was I mean, it was a hot mess that didn't line up at all, but it was there.
We started doing lots of unmuted stuff on Zoom as time went on. To start with, it was interesting actually. It was an interesting process. At the beginning, we started trying to emulate our live rehearsals online, which was clearly very limited.
Same.
As we got better at it and realised what worked and what didn't, we started doing things that we wouldn't do in our live rehearsals, and we started teaching in a different way. And one of the things we always liked doing was doing unmuted warm-ups. You know, we'd just build chords or whatever, or just have question and answer type things. It worked really well. One of the things that everybody loved doing was the hokey cokey. I think you call it the hokey pokey.
We call it the hokey pokey, but that's hilarious.
And it would all be completely out of sync, obviously. But everybody would have to do the hokey cokey with their hands towards the camera, and it actually looked brilliant. It was so much fun. And we'd always sing happy birthday to people unmuted and things like that.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. Kept everybody going.
Those are all community things. They're community building things. That's where the podcast came from. When the pandemic hit, I'd always wanted a podcast. I wanted to start one when I was still getting my doctorate, and my husband was like, absolutely, you will not add anything else to your plate while you are finishing that dissertation. Like, but I really want a podcast. Anyway, as soon as the pandemic hit, I said, I think I'd like to start the podcast. Here's why. I work at a really small college in South Carolina, and my students are fabulous, but I had just gotten back from a conference, and I thought, how can I introduce my students to all of these people that we get to know and work with, all of these colleagues in our fields that go to these huge conferences? Some of my students won't really leave South Carolina all that much. So I thought, well, I'll bring them to them, and I'll start recording podcasts and create a resource of all the things we can't cover in that one semester methods class. Or in y'all's case, if you don't take those music ed classes and you don't have those methods classes, becomes a resource of, here's what I wish we had more time to unpack.
And not only that, but we were able to collaborate during the pandemic with other choirs that we would never have been able to meet in person.
Yes.
Because imagine the kind of logistical nightmare trying to organise a trip by our community choir to go and visit a choir in Australia.
Right.
Never mind the cost, it would never happen. But we were able to have online collaborations with these other choirs. We called them twinnings, and I think when we spoke before we recorded this podcast, you don't have a concept of town twinning, do you?
No, I've looked into it. There are some towns that have the same town in other countries.
Oh, with the same name, you mean?
Yes.
Which is very common, of course, in America.
Yes.
But over here, it's very common in Europe. So a town will find another town of a similar size and demographic in another European country, and they will twin, and they will be called twin towns. So like Lymington, which is our nearest market town down the road, is twinned with a town called Vitré in France. And that was where our choir was going to go and visit in May 2020. Obviously, it was all cancelled.
Right.
But so we were able to do all these choir twinnings, and we had sessions with choirs in Canada and Australia and other parts of Britain as well that we wouldn't normally get to, and in America too. And it was fantastic. We really enjoyed it. And we got to learn songs songs of different styles that we wouldn't normally sing with our choirs. And we all taught each other's warm-ups and things like that. It was fantastic.
Yeah, we did the same thing with a choir and a composer in Wisconsin. So we called it the 1,000 Mile Song. But we planned a whole year of collaborating. And we got together and the different directors would lead different warm-ups. We learned one of the songs that the composer had written during the pandemic, and we performed that together in the fall. But through all of those rehearsals, we had breakout rooms to get to know all the people in the room. So in January, we came back and wrote our own lyrics that the composer then turned into a song. And then we unpacked the musical elements. Like the altos really wanted to have the melody at some point, and there was a big dramatic push for a key change. So cheesiness, they actually asked for it.
Oh, I love that.
And then he composed it. It was so much fun. But it was a collaboration that we would have never dreamed possible prior to Zoom choiring.
And I wonder if one of the legacies of this period will be that we will be more open to new things. Because we now have this online facility that we've all got used to. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were using it for Total Choir Resources before the lockdowns, but I was amazed by some of the choir members that were able to get themselves online, who weren't even really using email beforehand. Right. Really technophobic, and yet somehow or other they found a friend or a relative who could help them, and they got set up, and they were coming onto our Zoom choir sessions. And so now that we have that facility, there are all sorts of things that maybe we could experiment with for our choirs. Maybe we can do sectional things online instead of having to meet another night of the week or something like that. It could really help us out with the management of our choirs, and also it could open up opportunities for collaboration.
I love that. Well, now that you know a little about me and I know a little bit about you, we need to figure out exactly what we're going from here. Let's talk about some of the other ways we've collaborated. Like we've talked about collaborating with other choirs and conductors. Have you done any non-musical collaborations?
Well, I was thinking about this because I think that so much of what we do in the kind of community we're in is a collaboration of one sort or another, because we're in a smallish, well, actually it's a largish village, It would.
The
We
fact
call
that
it a
you
village.
call it a village is pretty awesome.
It is a village. If you saw Milford-on-Sea, you would understand what I mean. Size-wise, population-wise, it's probably a small town. It's like we have a population of about, I think it's like 5,500 people, and in the summer that nearly doubles because it's a holiday area. But it has a village green, and it has shops all around the village green, and it's quite quaint. And so, so it feels very villagey, and everybody calls it the village. And if anyone called it a town, eyebrows would be raised, shall we say? But but the fact is that so much of what we've done with the choirs in the 10 years we've been running them has been about being part of this community, and we're so dug in here. We everybody knows everybody here anyway, but. We're so much of our usual choir calendar is about supporting one group or another. Christmas, particularly, we'll visit the local care homes and hospital, and do singing there. And over the years we've got to know all those people who run these organisations. We'll do fundraising for the community centre, and we'll do concerts at the community centre, and we also have, we traditionally did have quite a large music festival in the summer here, and we were always part of that, and many of the people involved in the choir have also been part of the organisers of that. So it's such a collaborative thing in and of itself before we even do extra projects.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so true, and to see and highlight those internal collaborations becomes such a life-giving thing. I think for us too, especially because our singers, for the most of our choirs, we only have one choir that's adult. Most of our choirs are people that are in school still. And so communicating the value to the families and to the singer, what are you getting by joining this extracurricular after-school activity? And highlighting those type of collaborations on building what, quote, soft skills, and learning about different types of, we go on college tours and college visits, but we're also starting this super cool collaboration in the fall with some of the memory care facilities in town. And this is an idea that came from one of my podcast guests, which I think is my favorite part of podcasting, all the ideas that you get by having conversations. And we're teaming up with this memory care place to teach our singers and our students empathy. They go through training, learning tons of songs from the 30s and 40s and 50s. And then we go into these facilities and help the resident create a playlist that brings them nostalgia and brings them joy. And it becomes a really cool project where our kids can, pop out a ditty from the 1940s to get it started, and then using YouTube, finding other songs that resonate with the resident.
Yeah, we have similar projects over here, and music is so important for people living with dementia. And several of our members actually run choirs for people with dementia.
Really?
For the people with dementia and for their carers, and it's they're incredibly successful projects. My late father-in-law suffered from dementia, and I know how incredibly important music was to reaching him, especially in the later parts of his illness. So that's fantastic work. I really applaud anybody who gets involved in that.
And it's the same process of what we're doing here. Like, we propose, like you proposed, let's sit down and talk. And so we proposed to the assisted living facility, let's talk. We shared our mutual backgrounds, and immediately there were things that we were both nodding with, just like we've seen today in this conversation. We share so many head nods of agreement. And I think that's a big key when you're trying to find someone to collaborate with. You need to agree on a lot of fundamental levels. You don't have to agree on everything, but you need to have some of the same DNA so you can find that intersection.
Yeah, and looking at things logistically, I'd also say from my experience of collaborating with other organisations, whether they're musical or non-musical, it is important to find those people that you really feel like you're on the same wavelength with. But it's also really important to write everything down, because it's amazing how easy it is for you to be just having a really nice chat, you think one thing, they think another thing. You both think the other was thinking on your wavelength, and it turns out you weren't. So I think it's important just to write everything down and ping off an email that just says,
Yes.
so we had a great meeting today, and here's what we decided. Excuse me.
Oh, I love that tip. And we're lucky. Our whole collaboration is going to be captured in this recording, which is so exciting. But you also did that after our first meeting. You immediately sent a follow-up with details to make sure we were all on the same page.
Well, I suppose it's just, it's probably my legal background. I just feel like everything has to go to paper.
But I think that's a great lesson for everyone to have.
Yeah, well, it certainly helps with organising things. It's one of the things, we have a lot of, as you were saying about, creating templates and worksheets and things like that. That's so helpful to your patrons. We have a similar part of our website, and it's those kind of things are so easy to learn from each other, because if you make a mistake, then you can help somebody else not make that mistake in future. And even if it's just something trivial that's annoying rather than a deal breaker, it can be really helpful just to have those pointers written down. One of the things that that is most downloaded on our website is our performance venue checklist. Which just goes through all the things you have to think about that you never think about when you go to see a venue, because you're going, oh, isn't that nice? And oh, that stage is great. And oh, isn't it fantastic that this sound system is in? And then you're not thinking about, okay, well, where will the choir be before they sing? And where will they put their bags?
And how
where
many
will they
bathrooms
park
are
their
there?
cars? Yes. Yes. Things like that. So we have a checklist that has all those things on it. Christian and I also, this is a confession, we also have our poster checklist, because we are so good at forgetting to put really important information on posters about choir events.
Yes.
And I can't tell you the number of times we've printed out had printed beautiful posters, and then realised they haven't got the date on, or the time on, or the ticket price or something, or where to get tickets. So our poster checklist is an important one. But
that is so important.
It'll be a while before we have posters out, I think.
Oh, yeah,
one
a
day.
little bit. My director of operations, Cuffy, talks about it being the well-oiled machine, and she calls it, like, before you send a communication, have your person that just double checks it for all those things. But having a checklist, man, that would be just one more thing you can do and get it done.
And an email checklist, because how many times do you duplicate, like if you use something like MailChimp, you duplicate an email to create a new email, and then you don't change the subject line, so you just send the same email again. And think little tiny things that are so irritating.
But things we can all learn from. I feel like this was a good start to our collaboration. I feel like getting your resources out to more listeners and just the opportunity to meet your people. I love coming to visit over there. So I'm honored.
Well, I find it very endearing that, talk about, what's that saying? 2 countries divided by a common language.
Yes.
I always love it when the vocabulary is slightly different for American English and British English. How we talked about you did a dissertation and I asked you about your thesis and things like that. And so there are so many instances of that. But at the same time, when we're talking about choirs, it's all universal. Yes. And so many of the issues that whatever kind of choir we are leading, whatever kind of music we're singing, whatever kind of people are in our choirs, the challenges and the joys are universal.
I love that. I always let the guest say one thing that matters. And since we're both kind of guests, the one thing that really matters to me is this conversation and hopefully inspiring people to find a new collaboration, to not be afraid to send the random email and to follow up on that email, and to take the time first to get to know the person before saying, not just, hey, I'm having a party, come bring this. No, take the time to get to know the person and then decide. And we'll talk more about that on our next endeavor together. But I'm just so thankful you reached out, and I hope this inspires someone to say, I think I could find someone or something or a new place to collaborate. Do you have anything you want to share with the one thing that matters?
The one thing that matters. I don't think it's the one thing that matters, but one thing that matters.
There you go.
Is taking action. All these ideas for collaboration, whether it's commissioning a new piece of music or working with a new musician or working with another choir. We've had some great times working with other choirs. They're great ideas, but they're nothing till you actually take action and get started. So, take some action today.
I love it. We will take action. Thank you for sharing your story, Victoria.
And thank you for sharing your story, Emily.
Oh, it was so nice to share. You are lovely. Well, I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much.
And thank you.
Take action, my friends. I hope that you feel prepared and able and capable and full of ideas. Just go take action. If you need help, there's Total Choir resources. You can find me as well, emilybirch.org/contact. You can join our family of people over at patreon.com/musicedmatters. You should totally also go check out all of the fabulous resources at Total Choir Resources. There is so much there. I hope you've enjoyed this beginning of our collaboration with our friends over in the UK. Remember, whatever you're doing, whatever collaboration you have in mind, you, my friend, you matter. We all know that music matters, especially singing in choir. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.